Hello and welcome to episode number 2 of a podcast of Bronze and Iron. I am joined by my fantastic host, J.R. Rowley, and on this podcast, we will be discussing A Song of Ice and Fire books, Game of Thrones, the television show, the Game of Thrones prequels, Norse mythology, and today, J.R., we'll be breaking down and discussing the first chapter in Fire and Blood, Aegon's Conquest. Shall we begin?
Absolutely. Aegon's Conquest is one of those historical events that's massive in the history of Westeros. So yeah, this is a great chapter in the book.
Let's go for it. So Aegon's Conquest, just a quick up here, was such an important part of history, JR, that the Macers organized the histories by AC after the conquest or BC before the conquest. But we want to, before we start really getting into Aegon's Conquest, I think we have to talk a little bit about Aenar. This wouldn't have happened without Aenar Targaryen if he hadn't migrated his family from Dragonstone because of the visions of his daughter, Daenerys the Dreamer, who foretold the doom of Valyria, a cataclysmic event which wiped out the region similar to a Pompeii with a volcanic destruction. But JR, there's a really interesting thing that we've been talking about behind the scenes. Is Dragonstone built on a volcano, and did George basically just throw it out there by saying it's built on a smoking mountain?
I think it is. I think it's somewhat of an active volcanic island. And I don't know if it's going to come to fruition that Dragonstone ends up going out the way that Valyria did. But the fact that the smoking mountain is referenced is very interesting because of the prophecies, right? So born amongst the salt and smoke. Well, you're on the ocean on an island, and the island itself is smoking. So does that mean that Dany is the princess that was promised? You know what I mean? It's very interesting wording, and that's something we always look at with George is how things are worded. And to me, that one caught me, and I was just like, wow, okay, this might be a game changer.
And it's interesting because Children of the Forest had Dragonglass, so did they visit Dragonstone? That is something that's interesting too. Or was, I mean, obviously there's other regions with volcanic activity, but that leaves something to kind of think about, and I think that is really interesting. So
it does. If we go by the show standard,
yeah,
the children were on Dragonstone. Now we haven't seen that in the books yet, of course, but if that comes to fruition, that's going to be really interesting because now the children know about Dragonstone and the deposit that's there, and that this battle has gone on so many times, just like they kind of explained in the show when John
the cave paintings, which was one of my favorite scenes. Oh my god, that was awesome.
It was great. Even our ancestors knew it. You know, there's some great dialogue back and forth between John and Dany in the cave. You know, which was also kind of a metaphor for the cave that him and your Grit were in, which I thought was kind of entertaining. But
definitely kind of foreshadowing that they would get it on.
Exactly. It was really great foreshadowing. And, you know, for a season that a lot of people pick on for dialogue, especially with Tyrion, like that was some really good, genuine dialogue between John and Dany. I totally liked it, and I hope we get to see that in the books.
And John was so inspired to show her. But yeah, I think it's, you know, we kind of had to touch on this because we obviously got book versus show differences. And this is George saying, you know, hey, Dragonstone being built, it's built on a smoking mountain. So a little bit of canon rearranging here, hopefully.
Yeah, and some of this, and this kind of, everybody was disappointed that Valyria wasn't covered. The Doom of Valyria wasn't covered in Fire and Blood, right? Everybody really seems to really want a Valyria chapter. But really, old Valyria is sprinkled in throughout all of the texts that cover Ice and Fire. Like, there's not one book that it's not referenced in that's been written. And that goes through the Night of the Realms, the Queen's series, any of them, and main series too.
I know people have really wanted it too. It's like, I mean, people were kind of speculating that we might get one of those in here. But I think both of us kind of knew that it would just be sprinkled in as, you know, that's what George likes. He likes to leave things to the imagination.
Correct. But the thing that's great about this one too is it started changing my mind. Like, I had great theories. I thought they were great theories, of course, on the Doom of Valyria and what brought it about. And now reading through Fire and Blood, I find myself questioning my own theories, my own theory crafting. I'm like, oh wait, So I'm not going to spoil the rest of the book because we're only doing chapter 1, but Valeria is sprinkled throughout this entire series and referenced or through this book through Fire and Blood.
We'll
So
have to do
it.
a discussion on, like, these theories and kind of these foreshadowings that we get, these bigger aha moments that we've obviously seen as we're reading on through Fire and Blood. I'm not done Fire and Blood, but I'm trying to not finish it too fast. I'm trying to enjoy it as much as I can and spread it out a little bit and focus on specific parts.
See, I did the polar opposite, and I'm gonna have to go back and reread it for enjoyment because I'm like powering through it just for content purposes and everything else. So I'll go back and reread it for enjoyment at some point.
But we will definitely be doing some, like, we're going to do a bonus Patreon podcast after this. Maybe we can talk about that after.
But why don't we do a Doom of Valeria
theorization
Patreon?
Okay,
yeah, let's do that because that's a good one. Like what we know or what we think we know about the Doom.
Okay,
that'd be a good one.
Okay, we'll do that then. So we're gonna move on from the first part here, and this is where Dragonstone, Aegon the Dragon, or Aegon the Conqueror, was born in 27 BC, and his two sister wives and siblings come into the picture, Visenya and Rhaenys. JR, Aegon had an unusual relationship with his sister wives, marrying Visenya out of duty and Rhaenys out of desire, it was said, spending 10 to 1 of his nights with Rhaenys. They were all dragon riders, Visenya obviously riding Vhagar, and Rhaenys riding Meraxes, and of course Aegon the Conqueror riding Balerion the Black Dread. So let's talk about all three of these characters. In the book, obviously, Maester Gildane kind of goes over their characteristics and kind of what they were like. So we're going to do the same. Sounds good?
Yeah, absolutely.
So go
Visenya,
ahead. Yeah.
Visenya was more like Aegon, just definitely more of a warrior type. Very powerful, more serious and stern than her sister. She was said to have a harsh beauty, which is a really interesting comparison, and we'll talk about that in 1 second. She was also more interested in poisons and dark sorcery, which at this time is still very prevalent in Westeros and Essos as well. And it seems that she is almost a comparison or a liking to Arya.
I agree, the harsh beauty thing, and we're going to get into Rhaenys as well. I think that we're going to talk a little bit about Aegon being like Jon too. So I'm sure some of you have these inklings as well, but the harsh beauty, Arya being called Horseface and many other names, being more of a tomboy. And, there's theories out there that Arya is going to get Dark Sister in the books. And obviously in the show, she has the dragon glass dagger, which some believe belonged to Aegon the First Targaryen, which is very interesting.
The Valerian dagger, not dragon's glass.
But, yeah, the Valyrian dagger. But is Arya the darker of Jon's sisters? Oh, just putting it out there. Sorry, I had to get really lame with that one. But yeah, I think that Visenya, that Arya is kind of like Visenya.
Yeah, and I think so too. It's pretty easy to make the parallels. And I wrote down in my notes as I was reading, talking about Dark Sister and the last known whereabouts, which was revealed at Worldcon with you and Aziz and Ashea. And I thought it was really intriguing to get the comparison to Visenya to Arya, and then thinking that I really honestly think she is going to get Dark Sister in the books. I think that's going to be happen now with this little tidbit. I think it's pretty much a nod to the yes.
No, I don't think Arya is going to be a dragon rider, but it is.
No.
Visenya had Vhagar, which was one of the younger dragons compared to Balerion. Balerion was the one that was brought over, and Vhagar and Meraxes were both hatched on
Dragonstone.
Yeah, but Visenya, it's interesting to see. Because it was in tradition, if Aegon were to only marry one of his sisters, it would have been to marry his oldest sister. Rhaenys, let's talk about Rhaenys a little bit. Rhaenys was playful, curious, and impulsive. She liked music, dancing, and poetry, and she spent more time flying than both Aegon and Visenya, which is really interesting. She had lots of young men around her, and Aegon spent more time with Rhaenys, 10 to 1, it was said. by Archmaester Gildane. So she said she had flighted fancy, which kind of reminds me a little bit of Sansa. Sansa had her head in the clouds a little bit, thinking about this white knight that would, stroll down and kind of take her away. Obviously, she didn't get that, and she hasn't got that so far. But Rhaenys is a little bit more like Sansa. Did you get that vibe? Or
I was totally getting that vibe, and the idealistic fantasy of what is, and not realizing that she lives in Westeros. For Sansa, she definitely was in the clouds, and she scoffed at the Hound so often and so much, and the Hound is the only one that's the true knight. I mean, okay, other than Brienne and a couple, yes, there's a couple others.
It's hard for you, but you're gonna get grilled in the comment section. Relax there, JR.
Oh, I know. There's a couple of true knights. We can go ahead and say that, but
Sandor, I in agreement, and I think people in the comment section will agree with us that Sandor, because he's like he doesn't see night. I mean, the perception of knights, what is actually and what they actually do is a huge difference.
Correct. And a knight with shining armor has never had his metal tested, and the Hound is the complete testament to that. Whereas Loras, when the Hound defends him from his brother, is in a bright, shiny armor that, hasn't been dented. So, yeah, great. He's good with a stick, and he can knock people off a horse. What can he do in battle? Nothing.
Yeah, so it, she was more she was more like a Rhaegar who was, interested in, he didn't like war. Obviously, he had to be a part of it, but Rhaenys seemed to be more expressive than Visenya, who was more
right. And she was huge into music, instruments, dancing, poetry, which is very much
she was a girly girl.
Right. But it also goes to Rhaegar, like you said, as well. I mean, in his early years, he was known as being very bookish and loving music. It wasn't until almost into his teens when he picked up a sword, when he figured out that he had to, or he became aware of the prophecy of the line of Jaharis and what needed to happen for the prince that was promised.
And some people think that he, possibly could have picked up a sign in Portents, which was thought to perhaps be the journal of Daenerys the Dreamer, which is really interesting. Something that, that we should probably talk about a little bit in the podcast too, that being important prophecy, dragon dreams as compared to, green dreams and weirwood thoughts in the Weirnet.
Or even wolf dreams.
Yeah, my goodness. It goes pretty deep. But yeah, definitely a difference between Visenya and Rhaenys. And then we have Aegon, an enigma.
Aegon.
Yeah, enigma.
He absolutely is. Has sword Blackfire.
Yep.
Renowned as one of the greatest warriors.
Mm-hmm.
Never rode in tournament, which I thought was a big part. That was
tournament or melee, like 1-on-1.
Yeah, I never fought in a melee either. Absolutely. Had Balerion the Black Dread and only rode him into battle. Small council of trust and took command and took care of his enemies, but still forgiving. He refused to kill a family that bent the knee, even if they initially opposed him.
And it's really interesting. I mean, in the show, we saw Jon use a little bit of restraint last season. Obviously, when Sansa wanted things to be fixed, and everybody was there in the Hall of Winterfell. Jon obviously had to do what he had to do at the Night's Watch. I mean, he got assassinated and got brought back, but and this part really, really gave me Jon Snow vibes. Like Aegon and Jon Snow are very similar. And we know
absolutely
we at least think. I would think that Jon's name is Aegon if it's going to be put in the show. I don't know if George is going to have a different name for him in the books. Jaehaerys would be another great name for Jon, but I think that this was giving me Jon Snow vibes. The small council of trust, Jon and Davos and these other people that he's led, and even Sansa last season. And in the books, obviously Jon hasn't got as far as the show, but I think Jon is kind of always led by example, and despite not knowing his heritage, which is really an amazing thing.
Absolutely. And he embraces the Stark side so much and so well that he's a better Stark than Robb was.
Oh,
I mean, if you think about it, right? Because love is the death of duty, and he chose duty over love, and then Robb lost his head for it.
yeah. I
You know
mean,
what I mean? I mean, it's just kind of one of those things. It makes you go, "Wow."
there's going to be an interesting twist with that, with Maester Aemon's words in the end. I have a few thoughts on that, but this isn't
I know
a
you
Jon
do.
Snow podcast
No,
today.
it is not. But it's hard. Isn't it hard not to make the parallels to the current storyline,
Well, I
going
mean,
back into the histories? I mean, I find myself constantly looking back and going, or looking forward from this book, going, okay, well, this is comparable to X.
Well, I mean, look at this. Aegon was cheered on by the small folk when he was crowned, but the Seven Kingdoms were not happy about it. So maybe this changes and the opposite happens in the future. This could be foreshadowing that, yeah, I mean, obviously when Jon and Dany are going to be received, I mean, I'm thinking that they're going to end up together in the books as well. That's where it's going. But I mean, in the show, I mean, it's pretty interesting. Are they going to be well received at Winterfell? I mean, there are some people that weren't happy about Jon leaving at all. So, it's gonna be interesting to see. I mean, like, oh, so many Jon Snow Aegon vibes for me. When he was describing his character.
Yeah, this whole section on Aegon just screamed Jon Snow to me. It was crazy.
All right, JR, let's talk a little bit about Argilac the Arrogant and Harren the Black. You want to give kind of a little description of both and talk a little bit about both of these characters.
All right, I'm going to start with Harren the Black on this one. So, Harren the Black is an Iron Islander that took over or built Harrenhal. Harren the Black of House Hoare used slave labor during the building and construction of Harrenhal. There was a rebellion from the Riverlands, and he was the first to quote a phrase about traitors of the Trident, which I'll get to in a second. The traitors of the Trident, and it seems to be a reoccurring thing on the Trident. He was very, very cruel, and he took his lands by conquest. He was definitely on the bad side of Ironborn culture, so you could probably make a book Euron comparison to this.
Yeah, I mean, like he people didn't like him. I mean, some people liked Euron, but I mean, he wasn't liked by a lot of people.
Yeah, no, he wasn't even liked by the majority of Iron Islanders.
I mean, how many people died? Like, didn't thousands of people die during, like, when he was building Harrenhal? Kind of like what happened with the pyramids. I mean, but at least people, when the pyramids were being built, I mean, at least like people were like volunteering, like they wanted to build this like amazing structure, right?
Right, and he's not so much of a nice guy. So he often bragged, and very loudly, that his castle was impenetrable. And we know from the current series that, Harrenhal was burnt and melted. So this gives the whole background and story of what actually transpired at Harrenhal. He was given several chances to yield, to bend the knee, to do anything else. And finally, Aegon pretty much got sick of it and went and dealt with him himself. And he burned down everything. And he actually made an arrogant quote of, well, I don't really care. You can't burn stone. And he got proven very, very wrong very quickly.
Oh yeah, I mean, when it was like being and Aegon said, "When the sun sets, your line shall end." One of the awesome quotes from this chapter, that them being burned alive, the stone turning to molten stone. That is pretty intense
and exploding.
Exploding. I mean, they had all sorts of like. They had, places where there was salt beef and like little places where people could go eat and stuff like that. So where there was like hay and wood and I mean, he didn't calculate that he would fly up to where he looked like a fly on the moon. And then poof, this came down and like rain fire from the sky. It was so descriptive when I was reading this. This was like one of my favorite parts to read. So far in Fire and Blood and just in A Song of Ice and Fire in general, I just love this part of the book. And it was like just like George still has it, you know what I mean? The descriptiveness, making you feel like you were there and like being like, oh man, those
No,
people
when he
like
goes out,
really,
when he talks about flying Balerion into the moon and then coming back down,
yeah.
that was just sick visually because he, you remember the original Batman, right? Like the '89 Michael Keaton Batman,
Oh hell yeah.
where the Batwing goes up against the moon and makes the bat symbol and then starts falling back down into the fight. Like
You-
that's what
is
I
that a
pictured
nod
in
to
my
that?
head.
You think it's a nod to that? That'd be interesting if it was.
I don't know, but that's instantly what I thought of. I just wanted to see Valerian like partially eclipse the moon and then drop back down into the fight, right?
I had kind of an interesting thought for the show. I don't know. Will the Night King do this in King's Landing or Winterfell? Like, oh, like you see the cold, but then he flies in and boom, he kind of comes in. Because, I mean, the Winterfell isn't impenetrable. Neither is King's Landing. But I could see like something like that happening in the show, and that would be really interesting if that kind of like then there's these little slivers, these little foreshadowings of things that are going to happen, like the Night King taking a dragon, enslaving the dragon after he kills it, and then he does that. That would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that would be great nods to the histories and forward. I mean, this is so fantastic. I'm so glad we have new material.
So yeah, Harrenhal, 5 towers, Blackstone. There was lots of water, and we learned that the inside was not immune to dragon's fire.
No, and they make that comment, and Aegon says, "Yeah, it might be made out of stone, but you still have straw in the mortar, you still have wood in the structure, you still have, yeah, I could burn this down. Watch this."
Part of me thinks like Cersei's kind of like Harren the Black, you know, like she's arrogant, like that arrogance. Like
Oh yeah,
like she's gonna lock herself in King's Landing like the Mad King. I think she's gonna end up doing the same thing in the books too, like where she, yeah, we're gonna get this parallel, and she's just gonna she's like gonna get burned out of there or something, you know. Like she's gonna I don't know. It's just like because the House of the Undying vision in the show, we see, I mean, the keep is destroyed and there's snow on the throne. And then obviously in the books, it's described that way as well. And it's just like, I don't know, man. Cersei is arrogant like Harren the Black.
absolutely is, and I think that's probably the best current storyline comparison.
Okay, well, Harren the Black, I mean, of House Whore, of No More. I know Aziz is a huge fan of House Whore. No More. House Whore is No More. Let's talk about Argilac the Arrogant.
Argilac the Arrogant. Okay, so these are the two kings or self-proclaimed kings, Harren the Black and Argilac the Arrogant of House. How do you even pronounce that?
Durrandon.
Durrandon. They were the two that were the biggest thorns in Aegon's side. Can we agree to that?
Oh yeah, for sure. The Storm King, and then I mean, Harren the Black had taken the Riverlands by conquest.
Correct. And so this is Stormlands, which we now know belongs to House Baratheon.
Mm-hmm.
He had a gray mane and not black mane of hair, which we know is one of the top features of Baratheons.
But it was interesting that it was described because black of hair, right?
Correct. Black of hair.
Yeah.
He only had one heir, and he was older in age. I don't think they give a specific age, but you definitely get the impression that he was elderly.
Yeah, like 60 or something.
Yeah, 60, which is up there for Westeros, let's face it.
Something like that. Like around that age, like he couldn't like have any more heirs or anything like that.
So,
well, I mean, I don't know. Walder Frey.
Oh God, yeah, Walder Frey.
But yeah, he wasn't as good as a fighter for sure.
No, wait, I don't think Walder Frey is much of a fighter. Even in his youth, they never talk about him being a great fighter.
Arrogant is no Barristan Selmy. Let's just say that.
Yeah, definitely not. Definitely not a Barristan Selmy, but he is a stubborn old man. His heir ended up marrying Orys Baratheon, who is a half-bastard brother of Aegon himself.
Really liked the Orys Baratheon character.
He was really great. And, well, can we, little spoiler alert for future chapter?
What? Nope. No.
Damn it. Okay. We want to talk about it then. Storm's End, as it turns out, was not impenetrable either. Outnumbered 2-1, Aegon still had Balerion the Black Dread, right?
I mean,
Who, by the way, blows black fire,
oh,
right?
oh.
What did you think when you read that?
Really, really interesting. Really interesting. 'Cause, I mean, there's so many people that theorize in the books that, the Night King would get it, would have an ice dragon and do blue fire. It's just so interesting that because Drogon doesn't do that, and he's kind of like the reincarnation of Balerion. So this Balerion is a super special dragon, right? I don't know.
Right, and then they make another reference to another dragon that blows white fire.
Right.
So I was just like, what?
All sorts of different fire, which is interesting because if we think of stars, a blue star is much hotter than a red dwarf, and then there's stars that have been depleted to become neutron stars that are white or more magnetic because they're simply cores and stuff like that. But it's really interesting. I don't want to get too cosmic about it, but did George base it off that? I don't I want to know more of the science behind Dragonfire and why.
I'm sure LML is going to have a heyday with this.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's someone's gonna come up with something where I'm like, okay, yeah, that's great. I believe that,
Right, absolutely. So at the end of the battle against Argilac, the Baratheons take over the Stormlands, and they get Storm's End.
And it's funny because Argella, who is Argilac's heir, Oris ends up marrying her.
Correct.
And takes, we got the sigil of the stag, and then they move on, and that's the thing, man.
Yeah, and they go on from there. So it's still, so the Targaryen blood runs deep in the Baratheon line, which I thought was kind of interesting, especially since the Targaryen traits are so prominent. I mean, think about how much, DNA wise, how strong that DNA code is to always have black-haired babes, as opposed to the blondes of Targaryen, right?
Right.
I mean, you're talking about very dominant traits, which, the Targaryen traits would actually kind of be a recessive trait because of the eye color and hair color, right? It's really interesting when you start breaking down DNA stuff, but I won't geek out on that. That's actually a whole thing.
So it's really, I mean, they delivered Lady Argella gagged, chained, and naked to the camp of Oris Baratheon. It is said that Baratheon unchained her with his own hands, wrapped his cloak around her, poured her wine, and spoke to her gently, telling her of her father's courage and the manner of his death. And afterward, to honor the fallen king, he took the arms and words of the Durrandon for his own. The crowned stag became his sigil, Storm's End became his seat, and Lady Argella became his wife. So, yeah.
So, and this is huge. And if you let that slip between the context of what's actually happening when he does that, what does that remind you of? Is this where tradition was part of the tradition and marriage tradition in Westeros? So this very well might be the origin of it. And if this is the origin of it, then the first person to cloak Sansa was the Hound after Meryn Trant was beating her.
Oh, so you're trying to spring sand theory right now,
right?
Oh man,
she was beaten and chained, which is very much like Sansa. The first person to cloak her is the Hound after Tyrion walks in to save her. So you have two people kind of vying here because Tyrion does save her and ends up marrying her, and then you have the Hound who cloaked her first, which could be foreshadowing for later event.
I don't think the Hound is going to end up marrying Sansa because I think they have a brother-sisterly relationship. It's more like a sibling relationship. But I think it's interesting that it was Tyrion that ended up marrying her, and I think that they actually might end up together again towards the end of the story.
Oh, it's possible, but like I've said before about Sansa, and I wouldn't hate it if it happened.
So at this point, both the Riverlands and Stormlands are now under control of Aegon the Dragon. And basically, kings and queens and all these people were like, okay, yeah, Aegon the Conqueror, you're the man. But at Winterfell, King Torrhen Stark called his banners and called together the people of the north. Queen Shara of the Vale, her regent son Ronald took refuge in the Eyrie and sent the army to the bloody gate of the Vale of Erin. And Queen Shara, the flower of the mountain, the fairest maiden in all of the seven kingdoms. She was like sending like selfies like to Aegon, like, hey, marry me. That's kind of creepy, right?
Yeah, that was kind of creepy. Like she sent portraits of herself and offered her hand in marriage to Aegon. It was really kind of weird. And she was aged by then, like she was 10 years out of her prime.
Yeah,
at this point of the story.
But so she was like still beautiful, but like, I mean, Aegon had already had 2 sister wives anyways.
Correct.
And then meanwhile, the 2 of the greatest kings had a common cause. We have the Western houses. We have from Highgarden March Mern, and then we have King of the Reach, and then we have Lauren Lannister. So they got like a huge force together, and we know what happens after that, right? We know what happens after that.
The Field of Fire.
Oh man! So
which we did get a great callback to in last season.
Mm-hmm.
Very much so with the Tyrell loot train headed to King's Landing. I mean, that was very much a Field of Fire moment.
Was that the best episode of the season? I mean, it was pretty good.
Man, the loot train was so good, just the way it was shot. And the thing that I loved most about that scene, and it was one of the redeeming scenes of season 7 that I absolutely loved, is because you were almost watching it from Tyrion's POV, right?
Yeah.
So it felt like a chapter. It had that George R.R. Martin vibe to it, and they framed it so well with Tyrion looking over the entire battlefield with his Dothraki protectors on the battlefield. I thought it was great, and it really seemed like that would be a believable Tyrion POV to watch that battle.
Really interesting. You know, there was King Mern, you know, Iron Fist. They called it the Iron Fist. They basically thought that they were gonna deal with Aegon and Balerion the Black Dread. Big mistake. Geez. And then
just like Iron Flicks on Netflix, Iron Fist on Netflix, it got canceled too.
Damn, I didn't know you were gonna go there and completely.
I couldn't help it.
Delete them. Yeah, House Gardner and House Gardner got deleted, man. They
absolutely.
And then the Tyrells ended up coming up from under them, and they became,
because he immediately yielded the castle.
Right? I mean, which was a smart decision, right?
Oh yeah, but then he raised up, and they'd been in service. House Tyrell had been in service to House Gardner since pretty much the beginning of time, as far as anybody could remember.
Yeah, and it said tens of thousands suffered burns, some so bad that they would remain scarred for life. Yeah, definitely, it's Dragonfire. King Mern was amongst the dead, together with his sons, grandsons, brothers, cousins, and other kin. One nephew survived for 3 days. When he died of his burns, House Gardner died with him. King Lauren of the Rock lived riding through a wall of flame and smoke. like that's pretty badass, right? Like that's one of the things that kind of
how do you get through that? It's great.
And the Targaryens lost fewer than 1,000 men, and Queen Visenya took an arrow to the shoulder, so she got pinged during that. But geez, Aegon, so Aegon commanded that the swords of the slain be gathered up and sent down the river. Pretty interesting, some symbolism there. Mm-hmm. And then so I mean, King Aegon just wrecking everyone. And he found its castle in the hands of the steward Harlan Tyrell, like you said. Tyrell yielded up the castle immediately, but it was still King Aegon's intent to march, my man. He had to go to Old Town to get crowned, right?
Absolutely. The Old Town coronation. He was very well aware of the religious practices of Westeros. And the Light of the Seven had pretty well been established by this time. And the seat of that power at the time resided in Old Town. And they were guests, basically, of House Hightower.
Yeah. So, but before he went and did that, who do we have left? I mean, King Torrhen Stark, right? So King Torrhen Stark, he went to the Trident. And
correct. And this is just after the Field of Fire.
Just after the Field of Fire. And
He saw the aftermath.
man, runes of Harrenhal, slow red fires still burned. Oh my goodness, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is got to be quite a sight to see for a lord. And this is where Torrhen Stark becomes the king who bent the knee.
He sent Brandon Snow across the Trident,
Yep.
and the Kings of Winter knelt. Man, Torrhen. So, I mean, Torrhen made the right decision though, because if you look at all the other houses, I mean, how many people died in all of these houses, right? I mean, if it was me and there was dragons and I didn't have anything to counter a dragon, I mean, I think you just pretty much got to bend the knee, right?
Correct. And his biggest concern was that of his people, and it's mentioned in other texts, and I can't remember which one specifically, that he was so concerned about the northern men and how many would have to die in order for him to do this, and he wasn't worth the risk to him. And
Right.
that's he chose his people over pride, and he bent the knee.
Kind of like Jon trying to get Daenerys on their side in the show.
Correct.
To help fight the White Walkers.
I mean, the parallels are crazy, right? We're reading this, and this is ancient history in Westerosi standard. And, well, I mean, not ancient history, it's 300 years,
Yeah.
but, you know, it's still so prevalent to the main storyline, right?
Yeah. And then we have Shar Aaron. We have, we have Visenya Targaryen. And this was in The World of Ice and Fire, but I still love this moment, and me and you were talking about this.
This is pretty funny. I love it.
Mother, can I go flying with the lady? Can I make the bad man fly? This kind of interesting, but to getting to ride a dragon, like that kid was spoiled, man. I want to ride a dragon,
right? And he just went for a couple 3 rides, right? He just wanted to ride the dragon. Now, is that a euphemism for his young age? Because didn't he end up marrying a Targaryen?
I don't know, man. What do you think?
I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at Gemma's tree and see who married who. But I think he married a Targaryen. I'd have to look, though.
So Visenya had it a little bit easier than Rhaenys Targaryen. She had no easy conquest. She had to go through Dorne, the Prince's Pass, the gateway to the Red Mountains, and she did not engage them. But we get an interesting character in here. This is actually one of my favorite characters so far, Maria. Oh, the Yellow Toad.
The Yellow Toad of Dorne. She's quite a character. She's like the Olenna Tyrell / Cersei / Ilaria Stan, like rolled up into one big ball and not giving a crap about anything.
She was very fat, blind, and almost bald, her skin sallow and sagging. Argilac the Arrogant had named her the Yellow Toad of Dorne, but neither age nor blindness had dulled her wits. So the wits very, very similar to the Queen of Thorns. I will not fight you, Prince Maria told Rhaenys, nor will I kneel to you. Dorne has no king. Tell your brother that. I shall, Rhaenys replied, but we will come again, Princess, and the next time we shall come with fire and blood. Your word, sends Princess Maria. Ours are unbowed, unbent, unbroken. You may burn us, milady, but you will not bend us, break us, or make us bow. This is Dorne. I'm like getting like a Leonidas, like, this is Sparta. Like, right? And you're not wanted here. Return at your peril. Like that's totally the vibe that I get from that last part, right? Because when
return at your own peril. I mean, the line's been drawn in the red sand of Dorne, right?
Yeah, for sure. And to the west, Aegon met a warmer welcome to the great city of Westeros, Old Town. High towers were smart. They opened their gates. They're like, yeah, okay, come on in, dude. And open Lord Hightowers. It was cool to get to learn a little bit more about the Hightowers, right?
Yeah, and that's the great part about this book is that, yes, it is Fire and Blood. It's Targaryen based, or the histories told from the Targaryen perspective or in the light of the Targaryens, whichever you want to call it. But you get to talk about all these other families. Like, we're getting this whole Dornish part with the Martells and Mira the Yellow Toad. We get Torrhen Stark in the north. We're getting Orys Baratheon and how House Baratheon came to be. So, I mean, you're getting a lot of these great histories of the other houses during the time of the conquest. So, and it keeps repeating through the book. Like, you get to meet other characters through other houses that we do know, or the predecessor house that got annihilated.
Really interesting. The crone prayed for 7 days, and then in the Starry Septon got, the Lord spoke to me, the crone. And Manfred Hightower, Lord of Oldtown, was cautious. Lord and Godly, one of his younger sons, served with the warrior sons. Another had taken Valis as a Septon. When the High Septon told him of the vision vouchsafed by the crone, Lord Hightower determined that he would not oppose the conqueror by force or arms. I think that's some pretty good advice, though. So the crone kind of knew what's up.
Absolutely did. They kind of went, oh, okay, this is how it's going to be. Well, let's go ahead and invite him in.
And then we got the very, very end of the chapter here. Only a handful of lords had been present for Aegon's first coronation at the mouth of the Blackwater, but hundreds were on hand to witness his second, and tens of thousands cheered him on afterwards in the streets of Old Town as he rode through the city on Balerian's back. So, I mean, imagine being a kid, seeing Balerian just like stroll through the city, this huge dragon.
Right.
Insane. Or just people like being frightful. Like...
See, in the coronation at what is now known as King's Landing, on his hill, which he just built like a wooden palisade on it, and which is a small wooden fort, basically.
Yeah.
Well, not a small one, I mean, but it's a wooden fort. And there was only handfuls, like you said, but then down there, I mean, they're all over the place. Like, did he take some of the conquered lords with him down there? I don't think it actually says. At least I don't remember if it actually said that or not.
I mean, it's so interesting that he settled in King's Landing, man. Like what? Like, he's just like, yeah, this is gonna be my new spot. Like, I mean, there was lots of trade happening there, right? Like,
yeah, it was a hub of activity before the landing, right? So it kind of makes sense. And he had the table map of on Dragonstone, so it's actually a pretty strategic advantage to keep King's Landing as it is,
because Dragonstone is right in the narrow sea.
Correct. And he always has a place that no matter what that he can retreat back to, and he has water separation between the mainland and the island of Dragonstone. So I mean, strategically it's not a bad place. He's right in the middle of Westeros minus the expanded north. Strategically it's a good spot.
So, I mean, from there, Aegon the Dragon would rule his realm, holding court from a great metal seat, from the melted, twisted, beaten, and broken blades of all his fallen foes. A perilous seat that would soon be known to all the world as the Iron Throne of Westeros. So, pretty interesting. A lot of great stuff in this chapter, JR. Let's have a little bit of a chat. What were the things that stood out to you about this chapter?
Definitely the Jon Snow comparison.
So with
Aegon. Yeah, that one was huge, especially because Ned Stark says that he doesn't participate in tournaments because he doesn't want a man to know what he can really do when he actually has to face him on the field of battle, right?
Yep.
And so Jon, because he goes to the wall, was never afforded an opportunity to ride in a tournament anyway, and he may or may not have. But same with Aegon. He never rode an attorney because it wasn't really a thing then. The tourneys came about as a martial practice and showing your prowess on the field, right? So,
but Rhaegar did, who is Jon's dad, did.
Correct, which is also interesting. But what happened to his dad on the Trident?
He ended up dying.
Exactly, and he rode in tournaments because somebody could see what he could do. The Traders of the Trident, going perfectly segueing into this one, the Trident seems to be the most fought over ground everywhere in Westeros. Did you notice that?
Crazy, right?
Right? How many times does it get mentioned in just that chapter? I mean, it's in there like 7 or 8 times talking about the Traders of the Trident, or mentioning that Torrhen Stark comes down to the Trident, or, and it's perfect for talking about.
Well, the Trident symbolism, the number 3 is
correct.
Right? 3 heads of the dragon, the circular nature of the hero's journey in A Song of Ice and Fire itself. Like all of, it's, yeah, the 3 prongs of the trident. So interesting. Yeah.
It's fantastic. I loved it. Those were probably my 2 biggest, wow takeaways.
Yeah.
But then I have my funny takeaway.
Oh, okay. I'm ready for this.
So Dickon Morangi got
Yes.
burned alive.
Yes.
And all I could think of was Dickens never have a good time with fire.
Dickon in the show chooses to be burned with with his father.
Yeah.
And I laughed at that. I was like, oh my
I
God.
couldn't help it. Like, okay, so obviously we kind of get a dark sense of humor because we read Game of Thrones, but I could not help but laugh at that. I was dying.
Yeah. Oh my God, man. I was like, I was like, in the show, is this canon? Like, I'm just having a big laugh at my. It's I'm like, it doesn't really matter that much, I guess. But like some people, you know what I mean? Like really, really, like Dickon's not an important character to me. But yeah,
But
I
it
don't
became
know.
a lot funnier.
Yeah, definitely.
And then I have one other one that was not so funny takeaway. This one's a little bit more of timeline wise, if what we know about the timeline of Westeros is true or not. And nobody can exactly pinpoint if the first or the second coronation is the mark of AC. Did you catch that in the chapter?
Very interesting.
It was very interesting because now you're talking, it could be plus or minus 3 years roughly.
So
Which I mean doesn't really affect a lot, but it's interesting because it could affect some stuff.
like George speaking out the other day about the Long Night prequel. Some it is being talked about being like 10,000 years, and George is like, no, but some of the maesters say 5,000, right? And I'm like, oh, that's
Correct.
pretty interesting. Like, so we're gonna figure out that the history is actually a lot closer. It's not 10,000; it's more like 5,000 years.
More like 5, which is also interesting. But the one part, and this confused me, and I'll see what you thought of it. So after the second coronation, it was also said that Dorne didn't submit to the crown for another 100 years.
I mean, they're so badass, dude. Why would like they're protected down there, right? Why would they do that?
Right, but out of other stories, we're kind of led to believe that they did it with a marriage pact. But yes, there was a separation where, I mean, that would mean Dorne didn't come into the fold until well into Jaehaerys's reign.
Pretty interesting, man.
You know what I mean? Because they've always said that it was a marriage pact, and it was a marriage pact and agreement, and that's why we still have the prince and princesses of Dorne. That's why they don't, they're not required at court to do certain things because of how they came into the Seven Kingdoms, right? But now we're talking 100 years past that, which is into the reign of Jaehaerys, which that quote just kind of perplexed me for a while, and I was sitting there going, well, what's that imply? What are the implications here? So I was seeing what your thoughts were on that one.
The Dornish stuff so far in Fire and Blood, I really like it a lot. I mean, I'm not that huge of a fan of it in A Feast for Crows, like the stuff that we got in earlier on within the story of A Song of Ice and Fire. But I mean, geez, man, I don't know. I just love Princess Mary. She reminded me so much of the Queen of Thorns.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I mean, they're just. I mean, just really, really didn't give a F, man, that they had dragons. This is crazy because of their terrain, the mountains and the desert. We can well I mean next week we'll break down chapter number 2. We'll talk about how they have to cross the desert and stuff like that. A little bit of a spoil. Like they were like the Tyrell army losing half of their men while crossing the desert and stuff like that. Like just like brutal. And they were smart, like burning all of their food and stuff like that. Just like the tactics that they used against the Targaryens to not bend the knee was just really amazing.
Yeah, it's very similar to like Sherman's March to the Sea in the American Civil War. Like it's just scorched earth policy.
One thing that really stood out to me a lot was Visenya was interested in poisons and dark sorceries.
Correct.
That really stood out to me. Sign and portents, like the Danis the Dreamer stuff. Like I'm really interested in that. I want a pre-Valyria. I want the old Valyria chapter. You know what I mean? Like let us know. Like give us more. Like Danis the Dreamer. I want to know more about that. But the fact, that obviously Aenor and Danis are mentioned, an important part of Targaryen history, super, super interesting. Just overall, like just as a starter chapter, it has so much in it. It's just like jam packed,
It really is.
Some of the other chapters are more like, this one just started out is pretty jam-packed, but some of the other chapters go more into detail and are more kind of like stretched out on like a specific person and stuff like that. But overall, what would you rate the chapter, JR?
For an opening and doing a non-biased, I'm not going to compare to other chapters because other chapters are interesting for other reasons. But just as a standalone chapter, honestly, it was like an 8. It covered a lot of information that I wanted to know that we had been looking for a long time. The character descriptions of Aegon and Visenya and Rhaenys, that was perfect. That was uncanny for me. And just looking at them as Stark / Snow Targaryen, it was amazing.
Yeah, the descriptiveness in the chapter is so good. I really, really enjoyed this chapter. I would probably give it an 8 too. Just like, oh, this is so good. George still has, I really want the wins. All of us do, but just to have this in our hands right now, hearing about Oris Baratheon and Aaron the Black, that guy, man, it was awful.
Oh, he was a right prick, wasn't he?
Yeah. But yeah, this has been really fun. We're going to be doing a lot more of these chapter breakdowns, and we thought that we would, kind of discuss and talk about Fire and Blood since it's right in front of us. We don't have season 8 yet, and we don't have the Winds of Winter, so that we're going to kind of talk about what's right in front of us, Jared. We're going to do a chapter breakdown per week. That'll give us a lot of time before season 8 to kind of
Absolutely will.
And we're going to cover every single chapter, by the way, everyone. I hope you're excited about that. I know a lot of people were requesting it, even though we did our first episode of Miguel Sapochnik, but we're like, yeah, let's switch it up. Let's cover Fire and Blood. We obviously want to know your thoughts about chapter number 1 in the comments section. Try not to spoil too much about the other chapters. We're going to try to keep it as focused as possible. But hey, if you want to theorize and get down and dirty in the comments section and just like give her, we love that. We are going to have some epic conversations. We want to invite you to join and discuss Fire and Blood with us. We'll be having some special guests on too. We're going to have Gemma on. We'll, probably invite Robert Aziz on, try to get some other amazing content creators in the YouTube and A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones community on here talking about Fire and Blood. I think we're all really excited about it. And there's really a lot of positive energy in the community right now because of the book.
Yeah, there absolutely is. And on Geek Chat 1 right now, we have a chapter 1 spoiler section. You just have to look for it in the comments, but people are already theorizing on there. So you can definitely go there and check that out.
Hell yeah. And for those of you that are on Patreon, we'll know that you get the stuff early. But for those of you that aren't on Patreon, I'm going to be releasing the bonus Patreon stuff on Monday. That's what we usually do. But we would like to know what you would like to hear. Obviously, what kind of stuff you want us to talk about. If there's any theories you really, really want us to go down and dirty on for Patreon. So check the bonus stuff on Patreon will be up tonight. Really excited about that. And then coming up next, we got some more videos for you next week. And really excited to be doing the podcast of Bronze and Iron. This is something that me and JR have talked about doing for a while. And episode number 2, Fire and Blood, kind of fell right into our laps with our plan.
Yeah, it worked out. It worked out perfectly with timing wise. So we got one good episode talking about other stuff, and then boom, right into this. So it works out pretty well.
Of course, if you are enjoying this content, make sure you hit the like button. And if you do want to see more content like this, subscribe to the channel. Well, we're going to have a lot more content coming here on the channel. Of course, I'm going to be doing some Vikings stuff next week, which I'm really excited about. Vikings season 6 comes back. I'm going to be, I'm so excited for it to come back. JR, you watch Vikings as well, right?
Yep. So I'm gonna ask you the question: Are you with Bjorn or are you with Ivar?
Oh man, Ivar's totally screwed, bro. I'm with Bjorn.
So am I. Nice. Okay.
I met Alexander Ludwig in LA, so I got.
That's right. That's right. I forgot you told me that.
So this was an interesting chapter, but what are all the biggest things that you took away? Everybody in the comment section, hype bringers, members of the Azor Hype community and Song of Ice and Fire community, Game of Thrones people, what do you think was important in this chapter? Let's discuss in the comment section. Of course, we want to know your thoughts. You can go follow JR on Geek Chat 1. The link is in the description of this video. JR, you want to talk about Geek Chat real quick?
Geek Chat One is just an online community that supports all fandoms, although it is very much a Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones centric. We talk about all sorts of stuff on there, whether it's The Expanse or Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Marvel. We discuss it all. It welcomes all fandoms. So, if Firefly gets another movie or series going, we'll be talking about it in there too.
Yeah, Mandalorian, Witcher, all these other
all the stuff that's coming. Man, 2019, right? I'm telling you.
I think is 2019 going to be the best year for to cover just enjoy
I think it's 2019 is the year of the geek. I'm calling it.
I mean, the Spider-Man movie's coming out on my birthday. I'm pretty excited about that. Of course, if you do want to support the channel, you can support the channel on Patreon, become a Hypebringer, get early access to the podcast. We do audio early, so you get it a day early. We're going to upload these podcasts every Sunday. So yeah, be on the lookout for those. Really like 3 p.m., 2 p.m. to get them during the day, and people in UK, Europe, I get them before it's too late at nighttime. So we'll have these mostly during the day on Sunday. And we're mostly going to do these as YouTube premieres, like watching them together, which is really fun. New format on YouTube.
Yeah, the last one worked really great. We had a lot of people asking questions in the chat, and it turned out fantastic. So thanks, YouTube, for that great feature. That's awesome.
Yeah, and get interesting feedback like live, because it isn't a live stream, but you guys are watching the content with us, and that is something that is really, really unique. So JR, we're gonna wrap it up here. Of course, we're gonna do our oath.
Yes, we do.
Got the oath in the side chat there. You can see it.
I got it.
All right. Yeah, our oath to you is to be true.
By earth and water.
By ice and fire.
By bronze and iron.
We pledge our swords.
Our hearts and minds.
Our beer and wine.
Eat at our table.
Join our family.
Young or old.
Rich or poor.
Free with the fjord.
Free with the fjord. Hype and love, everyone.